In the scorching heart of the Arizona desert, a 14-year-old orphan boy survived alone with nothing but a broken handcart and the will to keep breathing. One day, while scavenging along an abandoned trail, he heard the desperate cries of a woman stranded in the unforgiving heat, her wagon destroyed, her body writhing in labor, miles from any help. Without a second thought, the boy loaded her onto his rickety cart and dragged her across the burning sand toward town, racing against time, dehydration, and death itself. The woman survived. The baby was born. What the boy didn't know was that the woman he saved was the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the territory, a powerful railroad baron who controlled half the land from here to California. And his act of kindness, done in silence and without expectation, was about to open a door he never knew existed. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, let's dive into the story of Jesse Dalton, the boy the world forgot, and the moment that changed everything. The desert doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. It just sits there, patient and cruel, watching everything that dares to survive beneath its weight. In the Arizona territory, where the sun hammered down like a blacksmith's anvil, and the earth cracked open in long, jagged scars, there were places even the vultures avoided, places where the wind carried dust instead of hope, and where the only shade came from the bones of things that didn't make it. Just outside the town of Dust Creek, tucked into the belly of a dried-up canyon, sat the remains of an old stagecoach depot. Its roof had caved in years ago, the wooden beams sagging like broken ribs. The walls were half collapsed, held together by rust and stubbornness. No one came here anymore. No travelers, no traders, no lawmen. It was a ghost of a place, forgotten by everyone except Jesse Dalton. At 14 years old, Jesse had learned how to be invisible, not by choice, but by necessity. He had sandy brown hair that hung too long over his eyes, skin tanned dark from endless days under the sun, and clothes that were more patches than fabric. His boots, if you could still call them that, were held together with strips of leather he'd scavenged from a dead horse 2 months back. He didn't complain. Complaining was for people who had someone to listen. Jesse lived in the depot now, in the corner where the roof still held. He slept on a bedroll made from old burlap sacks, covered himself with a wool blanket so thin you could see through it, and kept his few possessions stacked neatly against the wall. A dented canteen, a hunting knife with a chipped blade, a tin cup, and a small wooden box that held nothing but a faded photograph of a woman he barely remembered. His mother. She'd died when he was 8. Fever took her in 3 days, and there wasn't a doctor within 50 miles who cared enough to come out for a poor woman in a shack. His father had tried to keep things together after that, working the mines, breaking his back for pennies. But the mines didn't care either. A cave-in took him a year later, and Jesse was left with nothing. No family, no home, no name anyone bothered to remember. He'd been on his own ever since. The town tolerated him barely. He wasn't trouble, so they didn't run him off. But he wasn't one of them either. He was just a shadow that moved through the alleys at dawn, collecting scrap metal, bottles, anything he could trade for a piece of bread or a sip of water. The shopkeepers watched him with narrow eyes. The saloon girls pitied him from a distance. The sheriff told him once, "Stay out of sight, boy. Don't make me notice you." So Jesse didn't. His most valuable possession, maybe his only real possession, was a handcart he'd built himself. It was a rickety thing, cobbled together from old wagon wheels, splintered planks, and rope he'd pulled from a dried-up well. The axle squeaked with every push, and one of the wheels wobbled like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. But it worked. It carried what he needed it to carry: firewood, scrap, the occasional crate someone paid him a nickel to haul across town. He called it dust, though he never told anyone that. It felt stupid to name something that broken, but it was his, and in a world where Jesse owned nothing, that mattered. Every morning he woke before the sun, filled his canteen from the town pump when no one was looking, and pushed dust out into the desert to scavenge. Every night he returned to the depot, ate whatever he'd managed to find or trade for, and lay down beneath that threadbare blanket, staring up at the stars through the gaps in the roof. He didn't dream anymore. Dreams were for people who believed tomorrow might be different, but tomorrow would be different. Because in the desert, where nothing grows and no one cares, Jesse Dalton was about to hear a sound that would pull him out of the shadows and into a story bigger than survival. A cry, faint and desperate, and it was coming from Devil's Bend. The heat that afternoon was different. It wasn't just hot, it was mean, the kind of heat that wrapped around your throat and squeezed. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, bleached by the sun until it looked more white than anything else. No clouds, no birds, just that relentless, suffocating stillness that made the air shimmer like water over the sand. Jesse had been out since dawn, dragging dust along the edge of Devil's Bend Trail, a narrow path that snaked through the canyon and eventually led toward the old mining camps up north. Most people avoided it now. The mines had dried up years ago, and the trail was too rough for wagons unless you knew what you were doing. But Jesse came out here sometimes because nobody else did. That meant more to scavenge. Rusted tools, broken wheels, things left behind by travelers who'd given up. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, squinting against the glare. His canteen was almost empty. He'd have to head back soon, before the sun got any worse. But something made him pause, a sound, faint, distant, almost swallowed by the wind. Jesse tilted his head, listening. At first he thought it might be a coyote, or maybe the creak of an old fence post somewhere. But then it came again, clearer this time, a voice, human, and it wasn't calling for help in the usual way. It was raw, strained, desperate. It was pain. His heart kicked in his chest. He let go of the cart handle and moved toward the sound, boots crunching over the cracked earth. The trail curved ahead, winding between two tall rock formations that cast long, jagged shadows. He broke into a jog, then a run, following the voice like a thread pulling him forward. And then he saw it, a wagon, or what was left of one. It sat crooked in the middle of the trail, one wheel completely shattered, the axle snapped clean in half. The horses were gone, either run off or cut loose. The canopy that had once stretched over the back was torn and flapping weakly in the breeze. Supplies were scattered across the ground, a trunk spilled open, clothes and blankets half buried in dust, a cracked water barrel leaking its last few drops into the sand. And inside the wagon, slumped against the side, was a woman. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her face with sweat. Her dress, once fine and clean, was now soaked through and covered in dust. Her hands gripped the edge of the wagon seat, knuckles white, her face twisted in agony. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and when she opened her eyes and saw Jesse standing there, she let out a choked sob. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, help me." Jesse froze for half a second, his mind racing. He'd seen plenty of people in bad shape before. Drunks passed out in alleys, miners with broken bones, beggars dying slow in the heat. But this was different. This woman wasn't just hurt, she was in labor. He stepped closer, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "How long have you been out here?" She shook her head, tears streaking through the dirt on her cheeks. I don't know. Hours. The wheel broke, the horses bolted. I tried to walk, but," she gasped, her whole body seizing as another contraction hit. Her scream echoed off the canyon walls, sharp and raw. Jesse's hands trembled, but he forced himself to think. The nearest town was Dust Creek, at least 3 miles back the way he'd come. There was no doctor closer, no help, no one else out here but him. The woman's eyes found his again, wide and terrified. "The baby," she whispered. "Please, I can't do this alone." Jesse looked at her. Then he looked at the broken wagon. Then he looked back at Dust, sitting silent and crooked on the trail behind him. It wasn't built for this. Hell, it barely worked on a good day, but it was all he had. He wiped his hands on his pants, jaw set, and nodded once. "All right," he said quietly. "Hold on." Jesse moved fast, his mind racing faster than his hands. The woman, he still didn't know her name, was fading. Her breathing had turned shallow, her lips cracked and pale. The sun wasn't letting up, and out here, in the open throat of the desert, there was no mercy, no shade, no second chances. He grabbed his canteen from where it hung on Dust's handle and unscrewed the cap. "Here," he said, kneeling beside the wagon. "Drink." She tried, but her hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. Jesse tilted it to her lips himself, letting the water trickle slowly so she wouldn't choke. She drank in desperate gulps, then turned her head and coughed, water spilling down her chin. "Easy," Jesse said. "Not too fast." She nodded weakly, eyes glassy. Another contraction hit, and she doubled over, gripping the side of the wagon so hard the wood creaked. Her scream tore through the air again, and Jesse felt his stomach twist. He'd never seen anyone in labor before, but he didn't need experience to know she was running out of time. He stood, scanning the wreckage. The wagon was useless, too heavy, too broken. But there were blankets, a few pieces of canvas, maybe something he could use. He yanked a thick quilt from the pile of scattered belongings and shook the dust off it. Then he ran back to Dust, spreading the blanket across the flat bed of the cart. It wasn't much. The wood was rough and splintered, the wheels uneven, but it would have to work. Jesse returned to the woman, crouching beside her. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said, keeping his voice calm even though his heart was hammering. "But I need you to help me. Can you move?" She looked at him like she didn't understand, like the words were coming from somewhere far away, but then she nodded just barely. "Okay," Jesse said. "On 3. He slid one arm behind her back, the other under her knees, and braced himself. She wasn't heavy, but she was limp, her body barely able to hold itself together. He counted under his breath, 1, 2, 3, and lifted. She cried out, a sharp, broken sound that made his chest ache, but he didn't stop. He carried her across the sand, each step careful, deliberate, until he reached the cart. Gently as he could, he lowered her onto the blanket, tucking the edges around her to keep her steady. She curled onto her side immediately, knees pulled up, hands pressed against her swollen belly. Her face was drenched in sweat, her breathing ragged. Jesse grabbed another piece of canvas and draped it over the cart's frame, creating a makeshift canopy to block the sun. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He tied it down with rope, working fast, his fingers clumsy but determined. Then he grabbed the handles of Dust and pulled. The cart groaned. The wheels resisted, digging into the soft sand. Jesse gritted his teeth and pulled harder, leaning his whole body into it. Slowly, painfully, the cart began to move. The woman whimpered behind him, and Jesse's jaw tightened. He couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. Every second out here was another second closer to losing her, or the baby, or both. He aimed for the trail, the packed dirt where the wheels would roll easier. His muscles burned. His boots slipped in the sand. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. But he didn't let go. One step, then another, then another. The sun beat down like a hammer. The air shimmered and bent, making the horizon look like it was melting. Jesse's lungs screamed for air, but he kept moving, kept pulling, the handles of the cart digging grooves into his palms. Behind him, the woman cried out again, her voice cracking. "Please, please don't stop." "I won't," Jesse gasped, though she probably couldn't hear him. "I won't stop." And he didn't. He pulled that cart across the burning sand, through the broken canyon, along the winding trail that seemed to stretch on forever. His vision blurred, his legs threatened to give out, but he kept going, because no one else would, because she needed him, because for the first time in years, Jesse Dalton wasn't invisible. He was all she had. By the time Jesse saw the edge of Dust Creek, his whole body was trembling. His legs felt like they might buckle with every step, his hands raw and bleeding from gripping the cart handles. The sun had started its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of burnt orange and deep red, but the heat hadn't let up. It clung to him like a second skin, thick and suffocating. The woman had gone quiet about a mile back. At first, that had terrified him. He'd stopped, checked to make sure she was still breathing, still conscious. She was, but barely. Her eyes were half closed, her lips moving soundlessly, her hand still pressed against her belly like she was holding the baby in by sheer will. Almost there, Jesse had whispered, though he wasn't sure if she heard him. Just hold on. Now, as the first buildings of Dust Creek came into view, the crooked saloon, the general store, the sheriff's office with its faded sign, Jesse summoned whatever strength he had left and pushed harder. His boots pounded against the packed dirt of Main Street, the wheels of dust clattering loud enough to turn heads. People stopped what they were doing. A woman sweeping her porch froze mid-stroke. 2 men outside the saloon turned, whiskey glasses halfway to their lips. A boy about Jesse's age dropped the crate he was carrying, staring wide-eyed. Jesse didn't look at any of them. He kept his eyes locked on the small wooden building at the end of the street, Doc Harlan's office. The door was closed. Jesse didn't bother knocking. He shoved it open with his shoulder, the hinges screeching in protest, and stumbled inside, still gripping the cart. Doc Harlan looked up from his desk, startled. He was an older man, gray-haired and thin, with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm the moment he saw the woman in the cart. "Good Lord," he breathed, already moving. "What happened?" "Found her," Jesse gasped, his voice hoarse and cracked. "Out on Devil's Bend. Wagon broke down. She's having the baby." Doc Harlan didn't ask any more questions. He barked orders at his assistant, a young woman named Clara, who appeared from the back room, and together they lifted the woman from the cart. She moaned weakly as they carried her toward the examination table in the corner, her head lolling to one side. Jesse stepped back, his arms hanging useless at his sides. His chest heaved, his vision swimming. He wanted to sit down, to collapse, but his legs locked in place, keeping him upright by instinct alone. Clara glanced at him as she grabbed clean linens from a cabinet. "You did good, kid," she said quickly. "Real good." Jesse didn't respond. He just watched as Doc Harlan worked, his hands steady and sure, checking the woman's pulse, listening to her breathing, speaking to her in a low, calm voice, even though she probably couldn't hear him. "She's dehydrated," the doctor muttered, exhausted, "but the baby's still strong. We might make it." Might. Jesse's stomach twisted. The door burst open again, and Sheriff Dawson stepped in, his heavy boots thudding against the floorboards. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and eyes that didn't miss much. He looked at the woman on the table, then at Jesse, then at the cart still sitting just inside the doorway, blood smeared across the blanket. "This your doing, boy?" the sheriff asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Jesse nodded once. "Where'd you find her?" "Devil's Bend. Her wagon broke." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You pull her all the way here? By yourself?" Another nod. Dawson let out a low whistle, then turned to Doc Harlan. "She gonna make it?" "Ask me in an hour," the doctor said without looking up. The sheriff grunted, then looked back at Jesse. "What's your name, son?" "Jesse." "Jesse what?" "Dalton." Dawson studied him for a long moment, taking in the torn clothes, the sunburned skin, the bleeding hands. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not because he knew Jesse personally, but because he knew the type, the kind of kid who lived on the edges, the kind nobody paid attention to. "All right, Jesse Dalton," the sheriff said slowly. "You stay put. We're going to need to ask you some questions." But Jesse didn't stay put. The moment Dawson turned his back, the moment Doc Harlan and Clara were focused entirely on the woman, Jesse slipped out the door. He grabbed the handles of dust, pulled it back into the street, and disappeared into the growing shadows before anyone noticed he was gone. Because that's what invisible people did. They left before anyone could see them. Eleanor Thornton woke to the sound of voices, low, urgent, unfamiliar. Her eyelids felt heavy, like someone had tied weights to them, but she forced them open. The ceiling above her was wooden, rough-hewn beams crossing in uneven lines. Sunlight streamed through a small window to her left, dust motes dancing in the golden shaft of light. For a moment she didn't know where she was, then the pain hit, dull, aching, radiating through her entire body, like she'd been trampled by a herd of cattle. She tried to move, and a sharp gasp escaped her lips. "Easy now," a voice said. A woman's voice, soft but firm. Clara appeared beside her, pressing a cool cloth to Eleanor's forehead. "You're safe. You're at Dr. Harlan's. You've been out for nearly a day." Eleanor blinked, her mind struggling to piece together fragments of memory. The wagon, the broken wheel, the sun, the unbearable, crushing pain, and then a boy, a thin, sunburned boy with eyes too old for his face. "My baby," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. Clara smiled. "He's right here." She gestured to a small wooden cradle beside the bed. Eleanor turned her head, and there he was, a tiny bundle wrapped in clean white cloth, his face scrunched and red, his little fists curled tight. He was breathing. He was alive. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks before she could stop them. He's okay?" "He's perfect," Clara said gently. "Strong lungs, too. Cried loud enough to wake half the town when he came into this world." Eleanor reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the baby's tiny hand. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. She let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through her like water breaking through a dam. But then another memory surfaced. The boy, the cart, the desperate grinding sound of wheels on sand. "There was someone," Eleanor said, her voice urgent now. "A boy. He found me. He pulled me here. Where is he?" Clara's smile faded slightly. "He left. Right after he brought you in. Sheriff tried to keep him, but he slipped out before anyone could stop him." "Left?" Eleanor's brow furrowed. "But I need to thank him. I need to—" The door opened, and a man strode in, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a fine black coat and polished boots that had no business in a dusty frontier town. His face was hard, angular, with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp gray eyes that softened the moment they landed on Eleanor. "Ellie," Clayton Thornton breathed, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He knelt beside the bed, taking her hand in both of his. "Thank God. I thought I'd lost you." Eleanor managed a weak smile. "I'm all right, Clay. We both are." Clayton looked at the baby, his expression shifting. Pride, awe, something deeper. He reached out, hesitant, and touched the infant's tiny head. "He's beautiful," he whispered. Then his jaw tightened and he turned to Doc Harlan, who stood quietly near the door. "How did she get here?" Dr. Harlan cleared his throat. "A boy brought her in, pulled her all the way from Devil's Bend on a handcart, saved her life, no question about it." Clayton's eyes narrowed. "A boy?" "An orphan," Sheriff Dawson added, stepping into the room. He'd been waiting outside, hat in hand. "Name's Jesse Dalton. Lives out in the old depot. Keeps to himself mostly. But he got your wife here in time, Mr. Thornton. That's a fact." Clayton stood slowly, his expression unreadable. He was a man used to control, used to buying solutions, used to power bending the world to his will. But this was something money hadn't done. This was something a nameless boy with nothing had done. "Find him," Clayton said, his voice low and commanding. Sheriff Dawson nodded. "Already tried." Kids like smoke, but we'll track him down. I don't care what it takes, Clayton continued, his tone hardening. Put word out in every saloon, every trading post, every camp, from here to the Rio Grande. Offer a reward. $500 to anyone who brings me information on Jesse Dalton. The room went quiet. Eleanor looked up at her husband, her voice soft but firm. Clay, he didn't do it for money. I know, Clayton said, his gaze still fixed on the sheriff. But I'm not letting the boy who saved my wife and son disappear into the desert like he never existed. He deserves better than that. He turned back to Eleanor, his expression softening again. I'm going to find him, Ellie. And when I do, I'm going to make sure he never has to live like that again. Eleanor nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks once more. She looked at the baby, her son, Benjamin, and whispered a silent prayer. For the boy in the shadows, for Jesse Dalton. It took 4 days to find him. Word spread through Dust Creek like wildfire in dry grass. Bartenders asked drifters. Ranch hands whispered to cowhands. Even the card dealers at the Silver Spur Saloon kept their ears open between poker hands and whiskey shots. A $500 reward was more than most men made in a year, and Clayton Thornton's name carried weight from the Rio Grande to the California coast. But it wasn't greed that led them to Jesse. It was old Miguel, a weathered vaquero who hauled freight between towns and knew every forgotten corner of the territory. He'd seen the boy before, recognized that rickety cart, remembered the way Jesse moved through the world like he was trying not to leave footprints. El Muchacho Fantasma, Miguel called him, the ghost boy. When Sheriff Dawson and 2 deputies rode out to the old depot at dawn, Jesse was already awake. He heard the horses before he saw them, 3 sets of hooves crunching over the hardpan, the jingle of spurs, the creak of leather saddles. His first instinct was to run. But where would he go? The desert stretched endless in every direction, and men on horseback would run him down in minutes. So Jesse stood his ground, hands loose at his sides, eyes fixed on the riders as they approached. Sheriff Dawson dismounted first, dust rising from his boots. He didn't draw his gun, didn't even rest his hand on it. He just looked at Jesse for a long moment, then nodded. Mr. Thornton wants to see you, Dawson said simply. Jesse's jaw tightened. I didn't steal nothing. Didn't say you did. The sheriff gestured toward his horse. Come on, boy. This ain't trouble, it's the opposite. Jesse didn't believe him. In his experience, men with badges and men with money didn't show up to thank you. They showed up to accuse you, to run you off, to remind you that you didn't belong. But he didn't have much choice. They rode back to town in silence. Jesse perched awkwardly behind one of the deputies, his hands gripping the saddle horn. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky from pale pink to hard, brittle blue. By the time they reached Main Street, the town was already awake. Storekeepers sweeping porches, horses tied to hitching posts, the smell of bacon and coffee drifting from the boarding house. But they didn't stop in town. They kept riding, past the last row of buildings, out toward the sprawling ranch lands that stretched beyond Dust Creek's limits. And there, rising like a fortress against the horizon, was the Thornton estate. Jesse had seen it from a distance before. Everyone had. It was impossible to miss. A 2-story house built from timber and stone, with a wide wraparound porch, tall windows, and a roof that didn't leak. Fences stretched for miles, enclosing pastures where cattle grazed under the watch of hired hands. A stable sat off to one side, horses whinnying softly in the shade. It was more wealth than Jesse had ever seen in one place. The deputy dismounted and gestured for Jesse to follow. His legs were stiff, his palms slick with sweat. He wiped them on his pants and walked toward the house, Sheriff Dawson beside him. The front door opened before they reached it, and there she was. Eleanor Thornton stood on the porch, dressed in a simple pale blue dress, her dark hair pulled back, her face still tired but alive. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the baby. Jesse stopped in his tracks. She smiled, not the polite, distant kind of smile rich folks gave when they wanted you gone. This one was real, warm, and it reached her eyes. "Jesse," she said softly. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do with his hands, so he just stood there, dusty and awkward and out of place. Eleanor stepped down from the porch, moving carefully, and walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the gratitude shining in her eyes. "You saved us," she said. "Both of us." Jesse looked down at his boots. "Just did what anyone would have done." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Not anyone. You." Behind her, the door opened again, and Clayton Thornton stepped out. He was taller than Jesse expected, dressed in a dark vest and crisp white shirt, his presence commanding even in silence. He studied Jesse for a long moment, not with suspicion, but with something else. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Then Clayton descended the steps and extended his hand. Jesse hesitated. He'd never shaken hands with a man like this before, but slowly, carefully, he reached out. Clayton's grip was firm, steady. "Thank you," he said simply. And for the first time in years, Jesse believed someone meant it. 1 year later. The town hall in Dust Creek had never seen a crowd like this. Every bench was packed, shoulder to shoulder, with ranchers in their Sunday best, shopkeepers who'd closed early, saloon girls in cleaned-up dresses, and cowhands who'd ridden in from neighboring spreads just to witness the occasion. Even the mayor, a portly man named Horace Finn, who usually spent his afternoons napping in his office, stood at attention near the podium, sweating through his collar. At the front of the room, beneath a hand-painted banner that read Dust Creek Community Hall, stood Jesse Dalton. He looked different now. His hair was trimmed neat, parted to one side. His face had filled out, no longer hollow with hunger, but healthy, sun-browned in a way that came from work, not desperation. He wore a pressed white shirt, suspenders, and dark trousers that actually fit. His boots were new, sturdy leather that didn't flap when he walked. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. They weren't guarded anymore, weren't scanning for exits or waiting for someone to tell him to leave. They were steady, clear, present. Jesse stood behind the wooden podium, hands resting on its edges, staring out at the sea of faces. Some he recognized. Doc Harlan in the second row, Clara beside him. Sheriff Dawson near the back, arms crossed, nodding slowly. Old Miguel, hat in hand, grinning like a proud uncle, and in the front row, Eleanor Thornton sat with baby Benjamin on her lap. The boy was bigger now, chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed, reaching for his mother's necklace with tiny, grasping hands. Beside her sat Clayton, his expression calm but watchful, like a man who'd invested in something and was waiting to see if it paid off. But this wasn't about payment, not anymore. Mayor Finn cleared his throat and stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming across the hall, "we're gathered here today to honor one of our own, a young man who, in a moment of crisis, showed more courage and heart than most of us will in a lifetime." Applause rippled through the crowd. Jesse shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. The mayor continued. Jesse Dalton didn't ask for recognition, didn't ask for reward. He simply did what was right when it mattered most. And because of him, 2 lives were saved. A mother, a child, a family made whole. More applause, louder this time. Someone in the back whistled. "Today," Mayor Finn said, turning toward Jesse, "we present you with the Dust Creek Medal of Valor and recognize you as an honorary citizen of this town. You are seen, Jesse, and you are valued." The room erupted. People stood, clapping, cheering. Jesse's throat tightened. He blinked hard, willing himself not to cry in front of all these people. The mayor stepped aside, gesturing toward the podium. "Jesse, would you like to say a few words?" Jesse hadn't planned on it, hadn't prepared anything. But when he looked at Eleanor, when he saw the way she smiled at him, the way she held Benjamin a little tighter, he knew he couldn't stay silent. He stepped forward, gripping the edges of the podium like it might keep him from floating away. "I don't know if I deserve this," he said, his voice quiet at first, then stronger. "A year ago, I was nobody. Just a kid in the dust, pushing a broken cart, trying to survive one more day." The room went still. "I didn't save Mrs. Thornton because I thought I'd get something out of it," Jesse continued. "I did it because she needed help. And because I know what it's like when nobody shows up, when nobody sees you, when you're invisible." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "But somebody saw me. Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Thornton. They didn't just thank me and walk away. They gave me a chance, a real one, a place to sleep, food, school, work, a future." His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. "And now I'm standing here in front of all of you, and I'm not invisible anymore. But here's the thing. There are still kids out there who are. Kids who are hungry, cold, forgotten. Kids who do anything for someone to just notice them." Jesse looked directly at Eleanor now. "What I learned this year is that kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and deciding they matter, even when nobody else does." The silence was thick, heavy with emotion. "So if there's anything I want to say today," Jesse finished, "it's this. Don't wait for someone to be a hero. Just be the person who shows up. That's all it takes." The applause started slow, then built like thunder rolling across the plains. People rose to their feet, clapping until their hands hurt. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Clayton nodded, a faint smile on his face. And Jesse, for the first time in his life, felt like he belonged. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled out into the street. Handshakes, pats on the back, words of congratulation that blurred together in Jesse's mind like the heat shimmer on a summer day. The mayor wanted photographs. The newspaper editor wanted an interview. A cattle rancher offered him work on his spread, good wages, room and board included. Jesse nodded politely, shook hands, thanked people whose names he'd never remember. But his eyes kept drifting toward the door, toward the open air beyond the hall's wooden walls. He needed space, needed to breathe. When no one was looking, he slipped away. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and deep purple. Jesse walked down Main Street, past the saloon where piano music drifted through the swinging doors, past the general store where old men sat on barrels arguing about the price of corn, past the blacksmith's forge where sparks flew like tiny orange stars. He kept walking until the buildings thinned out, until the noise faded, until it was just him and the endless stretch of sand and sky. He found himself at the edge of town, near the old trail that led out toward Devil's Bend, and there, sitting crooked and weathered beneath a scraggly mesquite tree, was Dust, his cart, the one he'd built with his own hands, the one that had carried scrap metal, firewood, and hope when he had nothing else, the one that had saved Eleanor Thornton's life. Clayton had offered to buy him a new one, a proper wagon with real wheels and a canvas cover. Jesse had politely declined. He didn't need it anymore. But he couldn't bring himself to get rid of Dust either, so he'd left it here, at the edge of things, where the town met the wild. Jesse walked over and ran his hand along the splintered wood. One of the wheels was still crooked. The axle still squeaked. But it had done its job. It had been enough. He heard footsteps behind him, soft, deliberate. He turned. Eleanor stood a few yards away, Benjamin balanced on her hip. The baby's eyes were heavy with sleep, his tiny fist clutching a corner of his mother's shawl. Eleanor smiled, that same warm, genuine smile she'd given him a year ago when she'd first found him at the depot. "Thought I might find you here," she said quietly. Jesse shrugged. a little embarrassed. Just needed some air. Eleanor walked closer, her gaze falling on the cart. This is it, isn't it? The one you used. Jessie nodded. She reached out and touched it, her fingers tracing the rough wood, the faded rope, the wheel that had wobbled all those miles. You know, she said softly, Clayton wanted to have it bronzed. Put it in a museum or something. Jessie's eyes widened. What? Eleanor laughed. I told him no. I told him it wasn't a trophy, it was a tool, and tools are meant to be used, not displayed. Jessie looked down, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It's just a cart. No, Eleanor said, her voice firm but kind. It's more than that. It's proof that even the smallest things can carry the weight of the world when they need to. Benjamin stirred, making a soft cooing sound. Eleanor adjusted him gently, then looked at Jessie with an expression he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Pride, maybe, or hope. You changed our lives, Jessie, she said. You know that, don't you? Jessie swallowed hard. You changed mine, too. They stood there in silence for a moment, the desert wind tugging at their clothes, the sun sinking lower, casting long shadows across the sand. Then Eleanor stepped forward and, without a word, wrapped her free arm around Jessie in a gentle, one-armed hug. He stiffened at first. Hugs were still foreign territory, but then he relaxed, letting himself accept it. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. Benjamin yawned, his little mouth opening wide, and both of them laughed softly. Eleanor glanced back toward town, where lanterns were beginning to flicker to life in windows. We should head back, she said. Clayton's probably wondering where we went. Jessie nodded. I'll be there in a minute. Eleanor smiled once more, then turned and walked back toward the lights, Benjamin's head resting against her shoulder. Jessie watched them go, watched until they were just silhouettes against the glow of the town. Then he turned back to the cart, to the desert beyond, to the endless sky streaked with fading light. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who'd slept in drainage pipes and drainage depots, who'd believed he'd never matter, never be seen. That boy was gone now, not erased, but transformed. And as Jessie stood there, at the edge of the wild and the civilized, the forgotten and the remembered, he realized something important. You don't need wealth to be rich. You don't need a title to have worth. And you don't need the world to see you, as long as you see yourself and choose to show up anyway. He took one last look at dust, then turned and walked back toward town, toward home, toward a future he'd never imagined but had earned with every painful, determined step through the burning sand. And as the stars began to appear overhead, the desert whispered its approval, a quiet, endless song for the boy who'd refused to stay invisible. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt inspiration from the frontier and beyond.